Welcome to the 19th season of the Tipperary People and Places Lecture Series. This evening our guest speaker is David Broderick. He's a public historian from Lorrha. And David's talk is titled From the Golden Age of Illustration to the Great War, The Life and Works of Thomas Butler Stoney, 1875 to 1917. So the talk is about 40 minutes or thereabouts. So we'll have time for discussion and questions afterwards. Okay. Thanks, David.
Firstly, can I just say thanks to everybody involved here at Thurles Library. We'll go back to Mary. I'm delighted that she's here, and we've been working together over the years in bits and pieces. And she's handed on the baton here to Stephanie, and I'm delighted to meet Stephanie tonight, and Jane as well, who I've finally met after numerous emails. So thank you all, you're all part of this here this evening, and it's lovely to see Seamus and Brian, a couple of familiar faces in the audience tonight. Stephanie said that I'm a public historian, so I suppose it's a new term really, even though it's been happening a long time. So public history basically is this type of history. It's presentations, and could be tours, could be films, podcasts, that sort of stuff, storytelling basically, and just in an accessible way. In contrast with the old way of history, where things might have been locked away in dusty old books and we didn't get to access them, or we mightn't have been able to read them or understand them, that we do it in a kind of a visual way. And tonight will be very visual. We'll be flying through a few slides, but hopefully I'll keep you entertained. Seamus, as I said, is from Lorrha. He would have grown up not too far away from the homestead here of the Lorrha branch of the Butler Stoneys. And they have a burial plot in Lorrha in St. Ruan's Abbey, on the site of St. Ruan's Monastery. And when we'd be doing our kind of tours, we started doing tours there a couple of years ago, I'd always kind of stop at a couple of interesting graves. And I was always stopped at this one because Ger O'Mara wrote a book about Lorrha people in World War I, and he mentioned Thomas here on the left as being a soldier, and in it he mentioned that he illustrated a couple of children's books. So I was intrigued by this. So when we do our tour, we could be jumping from monastic settlements to Vikings, and then I'd always include this guy as well, who just on his headstone said he died, as a result of wounds received in World War I, but it never mentioned anything about him being an illustrator of children's books or painter, or his dad actually never mentioned anything about that as well. So this is just a kind of an example of how a story can be kind of fleshed out. And anyone that knows me knows I love this history of people. In my time working in the workhouse in Portumna, I got on the trail of a guy called Henry Ogle. He was the runaway workhouse master. And out of one little snippet in a newspaper, I managed to write a book, poorly written, but managed to do it. And again, to bring him to life, we had an illustrator. So I kind of have a love for illustrations. So I'm going to move on with our slides. This photograph, courtesy of Karen Ivers, and Karen spotted this photograph and numerous others online, and she liked the look of them. She just loved old photographs. She's from Mount Ivers in County Clare, so she purchased this small collection, and she actually gave permission then to scan them, let's say, and put them up online. And it was only afterwards then that she realised that her husband was a descendant of the Butler Stoneys. So I've been in contact with her. So the family of the Stoneys originally came from Yorkshire in the 17th century, and they settled in North Tipperary, with Portland Park becoming one of their main residents. Richard Faulkner Stoney married Jane Butler in 1812, and that created the Butler Stoney name. In the National Inventory of Architectural Heritage, the house is described as being picturesque, situated on a height overlooking the River Shannon and clearly visible from the river. Described as a great domain in the 1841 Ordnance Survey name books. So you can see this beautiful kind of a driveway into it. That's the Shannon down this direction. Portumna be over that situation. A beautiful, beautiful, ornate domain or residence. So this is the family. We can see this illustration. We'll come back to that later on. Here's the family all bar one, but we have the older generation here as well. So at the back we have Charles Kimball, then we have Charles, we have Ellen, the wife, Richard, Thomas Jr., this is the guy we'll be talking a lot about. In the front then we have Bose, we have the old man Thomas, and then we have Sarah Fanning. And Kim is missing. She's not born at this stage, and we'll speak a little bit about her after a while as well. So this guy, Thomas, in the middle, he would have been the local landlord, let's say, in the famine times in Lorrha. Now, Stoneys, there's a little bit of kind of negative folklore about them, and there's a story about them having a school and that they'd feed the children jackdaw soup and all this kind of stuff, but they had to turn from Catholic to Protestant. But overall, any research I've done, that haven't come down terribly bad. Not wonderful, but not terribly bad either, and the house still stood during the War of Independence, so that's usually a kind of a telltale sign that they mightn't have been too bad, but I could be wrong. But the house was burnt down at a later stage in the 1930s when the house was given over to a charity for Church of Ireland Mother and Babies in the 1930s, and it was ordered to be burnt down, and Seamus here has written about that in a lot of detail. So the first mention, when I went back to look at the Stoneys as illustrators and see could I flesh out a story on Thomas, this guy that I was hooked on, the first one I came across was Thomas Stoney. So he is related to him just back a couple of generations, and it says that he's an amateur artist from Tipperary family. He was tutor in English to the Prime Minister of Belgium in the 1810s, from which date an album of 54 drawings and watercolours of views, including the earliest known records of the Waterloo battlefield, later owned by Van de Veer himself and acquired by the British Museum in 2016. You can see over there £100,000 that they paid for it. That's what they do. They have these kind of crowdfunding campaigns. So that was a very valuable collection. There's just a couple of images here, and you can see some of the bodies still strewn on the battlefield after Waterloo. And as I was doing a little bit of research about them, I don't know if you've ever heard of Waterloo teeth. Seemingly it was a big thing that there was 50,000 people killed in Waterloo, and very few of them were buried. And scavengers came and actually took the teeth from the soldiers, and then those teeth were used by dentists to make nice pearly smiles for rich people in London and such places. So sorry now about a little bit of morbid history, but it is interesting. This is just some of the stuff, and you can see, let's say, the contemporary King Louis XVIII of France at that time. There's a kind of a caricature of him here, and he's on his tippy toes, so I did some research to see was he small or what was going on. No, he didn't seem to be, but you'll see this is the style of this particular Stoney, but it's very similar to what we might see again later on. So we'll start our story. Thomas's story obviously starts with his parents. So we have Charles and Ellen Butler Stoney. So Charles is the son of Thomas Butler Stoney at Portland, the oldest son, and he then marries Ellen. She is the daughter of Charles Kimball, the rector of Bath, and they get married in Bath, in the cathedral here. It's beautiful, actually. So this is Charles Kimball, father-in-law of Charles Butler Stoney. This is the Kimball window. He dedicated this to his son who was drowned in the army. The front door is amazing. It's an amazing building, and the family tradition is that he forbade Charles Butler Stoney to be a painter. So he would not give his hand in marriage to a painter. I suppose maybe at the time, painters didn't make a lot of money. This guy was inheriting a lot of land. You know, he was going to be a landlord. Basically, then Charles kind of had to do this as a little side hustle or whatever. He wasn't to be a professional painter, which I found very, very interesting. You can just see a few more pictures here of the thing, and this is the Jacob's ladder all the way up to, you can see all the angels, some on the way up, some on the way down. But yeah, a beautiful place. If you're ever in there, if you're ever in Bath, it's just right in the middle of it, right beside the Roman baths. And this is the house that they came from, much like Portland in its day as well. So he was marrying across levels anyway. He wasn't actually marrying below himself or anything like that. Velour, that well-to-do, this was the house of the Kimballs. And then I found the Kimballs private, well, it wasn't a private church, but there was a lot of them buried in it. And I was amazed to see that Thomas and Ellen's first child, Thomas as well, actually is buried here, and he's mentioned on the Kimball wall. So the Thomas that we see here was actually their second son, and they called him Thomas again. So I build up a bit of the story. And these are some pictures of the Roman baths, but these are part of the Butler Stoney collection. They were taken by the Butler Stoneys. They had cameras when nobody else had cameras, and they knew how to use them. We have some very early photographs. It's amazing. I didn't realize how, photography was on the go in the 1860s, 1870s. So Charles Walter Butler Stoney, born in the middle of the Irish famine, and his stuff started appearing online. And I was contacted by my ex-boss in the workhouse, Donald Burke, who's an art collector. He gets notifications online if there's stuff of interest locally or whatever. So these popped up, and he said to me, you know, I think they're connected to Portland and stuff. And sure, when I seen this one in particular, and it's no offense to this guy, the two of them are equally as good, but this one is quite unique because it says Billy Duffy died July 1877, having seen 5 generations of the Stoney family. And he lists out the Stoney family: Thomas, Richard Faulkner, Thomas B, Charles, and Thomas. But for us, you know, historians in Lorrha, this is so interesting because this guy, he's probably in around 77 at the, you know, or 80 in around that time. He's obviously worked on the estate for all the Stoneys, but this guy has lived through the famine. You know, there's no snapshots of the ordinary Irish man, well, Lorrha man. I think this is probably the only one, or we've found so far. And it was intriguing. And then, unfortunately, this guy is just known as the coachman, and we can only guess as who he was. Now, the late Kevin Barry did mention that one family were always the coachmen, but we just can't be sure. And then we use this one on the front page of our historical journal called The Lamp. And I just put a tiny few lines in the back page to say we had found this, transcribed it, and I got contacted then about a month later by Kevin Michael Duffy, who he regularly comes to Lorrha, and he says, I'm pretty sure this is my great-great-grandfather. And we were able to join the dots. He had all the information, and I had all the information, and we were able to find where he came from. And he says, here's a painting, he said, of my grandfather, John Charles. I think you can definitely see a resemblance between the two, but it was lovely to join the dots. And it just goes to show the value of kind of sharing your history. Other bits and pieces that I haven't managed to pick up from Charles, but these sketches, and he's obviously moving around the world as well as he's doing them. There's more from as well. These are kind of caricatures. So this is a very interesting one, and this book is very, very rare. There's only 2 copies in Ireland that I know of. One is in the National Library, and I had the pleasure of correcting the National Library to say that this was not illustrated by A. Stoney, it was illustrated by C. Stoney of Portland. So this is Charles, who's illustrated this book, and it's called The Annals of the Stoney Family. So it has all these illustrations in it by Charles, and thanks to the library here, this is the second copy now that I'm aware of that's in the country, because beneath the table there we have a big box of archives that we worked together on getting, and I was adamant we'd get them because this book for me was worth the entire price that we paid for the other bits and pieces. So this will be here now in the library for future generations to see. The reason I like it so much is because it is a primary source in ways, because there's illustrations here. You can see this is Borsicane Church that shows the Stoney pew and the Stoney vault. This is Kyle Park, that's outside Borsicane. And of course this would be connected with Alan Turing. I've heard of him. He was the guy who basically solved the enigma in World War II, and he's credited with saving loads of lives, and his mother was from here. Rosthorpe Castle, I think that's off Mayo as well, that's there. Mount Falcon, Richard Faulkner, Stoney, that's in it. Portland, obviously, we saw that at the start, and we have these lovely couple of deer. And you know, this is great because Portland, it was burnt and then it was turned into a hotel, so it burnt again. So it has changed. It's in a ruin now. It's very sad to see what it once was and what it is now. But anyway. And Aaron Hill is outside Borsicane as well, and this is gone. This is completely gone. Is this the only record we have of Aaron Hill? I don't know. This is how valuable I think this book can be. And Tumbracane Castle again outside Borsicane. And local tradition said it's destined to fall on the wisest Stoney. But it's still standing, so they mustn't be that clever. Emil Castle as well, I think that's outside Cloughjordan. And then they have Ralston or Ralston Church, and I'd imagine there's some of them Stoneys buried there in Yorkshire. But there's other stuff in there, that's just an example. Now, if that book is rare, this one is equally as rare. So it's a few scribblings about Cloughaneely by CBS. And I really stumbled across this one because somebody wrote that CBS apparently based in Balconnell House, but he was wrong. This is our guy again, because it had a connection with the Stoneys. It had to be illustrated by CBS. That's the only way he signs it off. So this is kind of a simple stuff, tongue-in-cheek. You'll see this girl here, her bonnet is a little bit big for her head, and these little kind of jokes and stuff going on. But there's only one copy. I think I saw one copy for sale in Dublin, and I haven't seen another copy ever since. And then I went up to Trinity College to see a book by C. Butler Stoney. I was very excited, and it's downstairs. You had to go down, and it was like going into a bank vault. So I gave the number of the book that I was looking for, and one of the ladies dropped me over an envelope, waiting there for my book anyway, and waiting. And then I said, "Geez, I look in the envelope while I'm waiting," but the book was in the envelope. So it was a little pamphlet, The Two Visitors by C. Butler Stoney, photographed by T. Butler Stoney, our guy here. So basically, it was a religious pamphlet. Going back in a bit of search on the Stoneys, they were Puritans. A lot of them back in the line are Puritans, so they're into the religion, so they're involved in these printing, and that goes through the family. This is belonging to the Dyer family. Roland Dyer gave me this in Lorrha as well, where he illustrated some psalms. You can see there just the sheep by the lake being looked after by the shepherd. Now, I tried to buy this, it ended up on eBay, but I managed to take a screenshot of it before it went, so I've credited eBay. But this is a fair day in Portumna. Now, anyone that's familiar with Portumna, we're standing on the square with the church kind of to our backs, and we're looking across the street. And anyone I've kind of showed it, I put a date on this in around 1870. So it's probably the oldest photograph of anywhere else in Portumna that's out there. You can see the RIC here, or the constabulary, hanging around waiting for the route to kick off on fair day. And this fella has been around the block. He's smoking his Tudine here. These people have lived through the Irish famine again. So there's a lot going on in that photograph. I was very disappointed I didn't get it. Here's again some more photographs that are online. I think they're part of Karen Evers' collection, or they could be here belonging to the library anyway. I know you had your own stuff. So there's some lovely stuff, some family photographs. Charles here, he has this habit of looking away from the camera or looking to the side, I think was the thing. So they were huge into their photography. There's a mountain of stuff. I have more stuff to bring in. So I was researching more stuff belonging to them, and then I came across Charles. We mentioned him earlier on, one of the younger guys, Charles Kimball Butler Stoney, and I found in the Athelstan Museum in Malmesbury in England, this just one-off painting credited to him. That's all we have known. So obviously he's well able to paint as well. So again, I'm just building the story. And then I found online, there was this famous artist, Paul Surratt. He was illustrating Indian soldiers in World War I. He has some sort of connection with Bose Butler Stoney. I think Bose Butler Stoney bought his collection, and there's an over and back there as well. So they're obviously hugely into art. So we'll move on to Thomas Butler Stoney. This is our main guy. Again, I mentioned Roland Dyer earlier on, and he lent us a copy of this painting of Portland Castle, and it ended up on the front page of our historical journal again one year. Didn't think too much of it, that there would be a huge amount of stuff out there belonging to him. And again, Jeremiah had mentioned him in his book as illustrating a couple of books. This is the story from the beginning. This is what's out there, all these photos. I did manage to buy these ones online. You can see him here as a very small boy. And they're traveling around the world, different places, Paris, Bournemouth, and they're getting their photos. They're adamant to have a record of their childhoods. You can see there the rocking horse. So there's a real social kind of history here as well going on, higher class compared to maybe the lower class as well. There's a funny story about this one. I managed to buy this one, but I didn't manage to buy this one. This one went crazy money. This went up about 80 sterling, just for one little photograph, where everything else was going for maybe £3 or £4. So didn't I find it on Facebook again, where a guy had mentioned it, because I was online through social media typing in Butler Stoney, and I got a huge amount of information on Facebook and on Twitter mainly. But I found the guy, Brian Stevenson, who had actually bought the photo. So I messaged him and I said, would you mind if I used your photograph for a presentation? And he said, no problem at all. And I said, what was your interest in the photograph, in Thomas Butler Stoney? Oh no, he said, it wasn't him, it was the microscope. He's a huge collector of microscopes. So he was in a microscope group on Facebook, and it was this thereafter. But he was very good, and he let me use it. This was another one I didn't get. This is the inside of St. Ruan's in Lorrha, and I'm pretty certain it's the Protestant school kids, because the Butler Stoneys built a Protestant school. This is it. This was painted by Thomas Butler Stoney. That's courtesy of Mark Stoney in England. He gave me a copy of this, and that's gone now. It's Haslam's, but it's gone, and you can see they had a kind of a lion over it, or whatever this, and Portland School over the door. So I believe these school kids with the headmistress were brought down for a day out, and again missed this one, but again we have our screenshot. So Thomas then, he goes to Eton College, like a lot of the well-off King Charles. they all end up in Eton College. So money is not a major object place to be, so he goes over there. I went through the archives then to see did he appear anywhere in there, and it does. He pops up a couple of times. This is 1891, some excellent platinum types. And then he's mentioned here again as being a member of the photography club. And then he's mentioned as exhibiting some slides here again. Some of the best ones were by Butler Stoney. So he's learning his trade, and in their archive over there, which they have a huge amount of stuff. Actually, his mathematics copy is there, but I think it's there because he was doodling on the back of it. And I think that they recognise at some stage of what he's done, and they kept this. So the golden age of illustration, we mentioned in the title. The golden age of illustration was a period of unprecedented excellence in book and magazine illustration. It developed from advances in technology, permitting accurate and inexpensive reproduction of art combined with a massive public demand for new graphic art. The improvements in printing technology allowed publishers to produce lavish colour illustrations for the first time. The revival of and appreciation of old fairy tales and children's stories coincided with the threat to traditional cultures posed by the advancement of industrial works. And it kind of collapsed in 1914, 1918. We'll talk about that shortly. There's one guy we mentioned, there's one of his illustrations, John Hassall, and we'll talk about him. Arthur Rachman, we might have heard of him. I think we've all heard of Harry Clarke, and I was surprised, I suppose, naively that, oh God, he was an illustrator, it wasn't just the stained glasses, but this beautifully haunting, the style. It was something almost that kind of a dark style, which it is. To understand what was happening, I remember buying a book called The London Sketch Club, and this is where they would all kind of hang out, these artists, like they were in their own little kind of world. And I believe Butler Stoney, now I know he's not mentioned, there's no particular archive here, but these are the kind of places that they'd be mixing, there'd be artists and there'd be authors, and this circle was going around London. A huge amount of books were being published, and they all appear to be, aimed at the children's market. So coming out for Christmas, you'll see little snippets in the newspapers. I was adamant that I would find and I would get a copy of every single book that he illustrated, and I'm pretty sure I did. Anything that was published anyway. So there's 8. So we'll go through them briefly. So we've all heard of the Pied Piper. And a friend of mine, David Rooney, he's an artist, he's one of the best artists in Ireland. You totally recognise his work. He did all the stamps for 1916 and all this. I asked him, I said, what style? Because I'm not an art historian, I'm not. And he said, they all look like pen and ink with watercolour. So he probably would have started as a light pencil drawing, then watercolour, then black line ink. That's his explanation. And I just have a little note in here about the Children's Crusade. When I was just doing a little bit of research about the book, the Pied Piper, the story, everyone's intrigued with it. There is a theory that it's connected back to these children, thousands of children took off on a crusade to the Holy Land in 1212 from Germany, and they literally disappeared overnight. They never came back. They were killed and they died and they were taken into slavery, and all sorts of terrible things happened to them. Some reckon that the Pied Piper of Hamelin relates back to that story. But anyway, he got huge praise for this in the newspapers, his illustrations. I don't think it's his best work personally. I think it's the old woman who rode in the broom. But definitely, I think it definitely brought him up there. Robert Browning's version of the Pied Piper. And you'll see as well, even though I have 8 books by him, I'm including the Ratcatcher of Hamelin, the German version, because it was printed separately in German, and I think that's kind of poignant in its own way. The Brave Old Jew of York, again illustrated by Butler Stoney. Some of these books, they're old fairy tales and then they're rehashed. And I think Butler Stoney has taken them on himself because there's nobody else credited here with writing this book, even though, that these are old stories. Again, they reckon loosely based on Richard of York, who gave battle in Vaim, or possibly James II, or Seamus O'Caca, I think as he's known here in Ireland. The old woman who rode in the broom, I like the story, it's kind of a witch. Funnily enough, when I look at the illustrations in it, I think I can see their view of the Shannon and into Portumna. There's a windmill in it, and I know there was a windmill in Dags down there, and I think he's kind of playing, it's artist's impression or whatever, but I think he's using stuff from memory, which makes perfect sense. But it's a beautiful book, and this is by him. This is his own story. It's kind of a rhyme, and she goes off to see the man in the moon, as you do, having the crack. Then Tom the Piper's Son, he's illustrated this as well. As I said, it's very hard for me to describe these when I'm not an art historian, but we all know that Tom the Piper's Son, he stole the pig and away he run, and there's a moral story there to be learned from by us all. and then the old man who lived in the wood, and this is written by him as well. And basically the old man said to the wife, sure, like, basically said that he'd offer to do his wife's work if she could do his jobs. That, you know, he said, sure, what would she be doing? And sure, her work is fierce easy, and sure, she went off and did his jobs, no bother, and he was spun out halfway through the day doing her jobs. But it's comical again, and it's reprinted, and that's still going around. And then when Hawkins sailed the sea, it's a children's book, but I think kind of more teenagers. So I didn't really know if Hawkins was a real person or not. This was about this guy, Sir John Hawkins, who's actually, I think he's a first cousin of Sir Francis Drake. So this is the time we're talking. He's on the sea. He's an admiral around the time of the Spanish Armada. So basically, it's about his adventures over to South America. But I just find this interesting. And it's the author, he says, I have omitted to deal in particular with Hawkins' connection with the African slave trade. This only need be said here. The traffic had already been carried out for half a century by the Spaniards and the Portuguese. The Queen and others highly approved of this business and supplied it with money and ships, and it was not to be supposed that a plain, blunt mariner like John Hawkins should discover any evil in this traffic. So basically, it's a little disclaimer about the slave trafficking that's going on in this book, because that's what he was. He was dealing in slavery. It's of its time again, and it's illustrated by Butler Stoney. So another one here, we have The Princess and the Dragon, and I really like this book because the girl in the book, her name is Edith. She's the heroine in the book, and it's about her story. And she's kind of exaggerating what happens to her. She's lost in the woods, and there's a princess and there's a dragon. But as it turns out, the princess is her little doll that she lost, and the dragon was only a little old wolf, and all sorts. But it's a very interesting book. There's a lovely little inscription here in the front, or a little note: "A Merry Christmas to Edith." So somebody has bought this for their daughter or granddaughter, whatever, called Edith as well, because she's the same name thing. But I just think there's a lovely little kind of story in there as well. So, and it's John Hassell. He's one of the most famous illustrators of this time, himself and Rackman and one or two others, who illustrates this book, and Butler Stoney. So you'll see Hassell is the main illustrator, so the colour illustrations in there are Hassell, and then the lesser illustrations are Butler Stoney. And I wasn't sure why his name was on it until I really had to kind of see these tiny little, because these are tiny little illustrations, and you can see he is TBS. There's actually, so he's doing the minor illustrations. But this was, for him to be attached to this guy, it's massive. You know, it's like doing an opening gig for U2 or whatever to be. So this is John Hassell, and he's huge for these kind of posters. Back in the day, he was the poster, the maker, and that's him there. The last thing I found credited to Butler Stoney was a page from the weekly newspaper, The Graphic. They employed many talented artists and engravers in this period to illustrate news and events to entertain. And this was one of them there, and I actually have it here. And it's just a kind of a story about a fella here, and he falls into the water. It's a bit of a satire. But again, it just goes to show that he was being recognised, and his work ends up in the Graphic. I just go back to the fact that his headstone in Lorrha does not mention anything about him being an artist. And this is a lovely painting called The Street. He was painting pictures as well. And this one is it's the Dolphin Heart and the Dolphin Inn. This one is Hamsey by the Sea. They actually have it over there. I was onto them, they kind of know where it is, and somebody has it, and no one knows where the key is in one of these stories, but it's in safekeeping as well, so this is just another painting by him. So he comes home from London. Don't forget, he's the oldest son, so his dad is pushing on, so the call comes home. Now, from what I can see in some of the stuff upstairs, we have a huge amount of stuff now, and I've only got a brief look at it. I think he was continuing to kind of do bits and pieces. The newspaper one was likely while he was home, but he was over and back. He appears over and back and on the different senses. It does appear that he's coming home to kind of take off the farm, and it says he had much interest in agricultural question and a keen birdwatcher. He loved the birds, the flying type. So we had the war then kicks off in 1914 to 1918, and Your Country Needs You. And what's poignant is this poster. It's not a photograph, it's an illustration. Okay, so it's been illustrated. So work is drying up. People aren't really too interested now in kind of illustrations and stuff. The war effort is going on. The whole mood in the country we're talking about, UK and Ireland, has dropped. All efforts are into the war, but winning the war and beating the Germans. So there's very little work for artists or illustrators, and what a lot of them want to do, not our guy, but what a lot of them want to do is avoid going to war at all costs. Some of them see no place for themselves in the war. So what you do see is these war artists come on board. Now, we could go into this in huge detail, but I won't. And the whole war artist movement was created by an artist to avoid taking part physically in the war. So I was stumbling around a bookshop in Kilkenny one day and really looking for something that I could kind of quote back. Because the story was that Thomas Butler Stoney was over there as a soldier, and he was supposed to be sketching off duty. But as it turns out, he was actually working over there as a war artist. So what he was doing was he was sketching the enemy line. So he was up there kind of watching, see what they're doing, and he was, rather than taking photographs, couldn't be going around with cameras. So a lot of it was been sketched and sent down the line. So you had these war artists. So I found this book, A Crisis of Brilliance, and it follows the story of 5 war artists. So you can see here, it says they're having a minor success. They're blowing up the Germans. And this was propaganda, a huge propaganda machine. One of the guys that was behind it was Rudyard Kipling. And a lot of this propaganda was to get young men to join, because they were losing huge amounts of casualties in the war. So it was kind of basically saying, this is good old crack to be over here, and come on over and join in the war. And one of the guys that they sent over, I'm going to read this now. I just think it's quite interesting. A guy named Paul Nash. So he's sent over there as a war artist for propaganda, basically to get more people over to join. Things turned for him pretty quick. So on the 16th of November 1917, a day after he was damn nearly killed by German shell fire, Nash recorded his impressions of this slaughterhouse in a long and passionate letter to his wife. I have seen the most frightful nightmare of a country more conceived by Dante or Poe than by nature, unspeakable, utterly indescribable. In the 15 drawings I have made, I may give you some vague idea of the horror, but not only in it can ever make you sensible of such a dreadful nature and what our men in France have to face. We all have a vague notion of the terror of a battle, but no pen or drawing can convey this country. The rain drives on, the stinking mud becomes more evilly yellow. Shell holes fill up with green, white water. The roads and tracks are covered in inches of slime. The black, dying trees ooze and sweat, and the shells never cease. They alone plunge overhead, tearing away the rotting tree stumps, breaking the plank roads, striking down horses and mules, annihilating, maiming, maddening. They plunge into the grave, which is this land, one huge grave, and cast up on it poor dead. It is unspeakable, godless, hopeless. I am no longer an artist interested and curious. I am a messenger who will bring back forth from the men who are fighting to those who want the war to go on forever. Feeble, inarticulate will be my message, but it will have a bitter truth, and may it burn their lousy souls. So that's a bit of a turn. Sent over there for propaganda, but yet he's been very, very honest. And these guys actually start sketching and illustrating what they're actually seeing, and it's been sent back to London. So I mentioned social media, and I was following a picture that was on earlier on about one of the Indian soldiers, and this guy had commented on it. So I messaged him, and we were over and back. And this guy, Keith Bogdan, he turned out to be a great guy, and we had a great chat. And he had bought this Thomas Butler Stoney. So it's his sketch pad that he had with him in World War I. So I was absolutely amazed, and he said to me, if you want any sketches, or, he says, I'll copy it, and he's copied everything that was in there, and he sent it to me. He'd picked it up in an auction. He didn't even know who the guy was. He just thought this was an amazing work. So thank God he did, and he was willing to share it. So I actually sent him over a copy of Gerald Mara's book, because that mentioned Thomas Butler Stoney and all the people in these letters. He also had letters. So a great guy that I'm indebted to. So these are some of the letters that he wrote. They're hard to read. I haven't had a huge amount of time to read all the letters, but they're all over to his sister, Kem. In the collection that we have acquired here, this is Kem, beautiful, beautiful lady. There's loads of pictures of her. He was obviously taking them. She was his younger sister and his kind of favourite, and even in his will, he looks after her in it. But in it, you can see in one of the images here, he's a walking stick, because he's injured a number of times in the war. And he's injured enough that he could have actually stayed home, but he keeps going back. And I'm kind of wondering, was he really trying to prove something? All his brothers were in the war too. This guy was an artist. In a way, he was childlike in his thinking and his thought process and his imagination. Even into the bird watching, I can imagine him as being a very, very soft kind of character. But maybe he felt he had to keep going back to this war to prove something. I'm only surmising, but he definitely doesn't come across like a hardened soldier in these books. But then again, maybe the descriptions we heard earlier on, maybe those did harden him, and maybe he was suffering from all sorts. We just don't know. And we can see he refers to one of the guys asleep in the trench that they kind of dug in. He also talks about being out foreign, and some of the doctors were healing some of the locals as well. But this is some of the battle scenes that he saw. It's just amazing to think that, as travelling around, he was illustrating. You can see there he signs off. Thomas Butler Stoney, that's 17. This one's half finished. The windmill here. Are these the locals going up? All in France. And he's named the farm here as well. I think it's Rownell Farm. Again, unfinished. See the truck here as well. Again, this one is unfinished. And I mentioned Paul Nash. And this is one of the images that Paul Nash spoke about. The one big grave. So Thomas is injured from an exploding shell while on duty on July 5th in Belgium. He was commissioned in the Irish Guards for field sketching. He was paralysed from T8 and he developed blood poisoning. He was brought then to the Empire Hospital for Officers for injuries to the nervous system, opened in 1916 in a private nursing home, Vincent Square in London, specialised in care for those who had traumatic paraplegia and brain injuries under neurologist Henry Head, along with listed men's spinal unit at King George's Hospital. Head and medical officer Captain George Riddock were able to learn much about spinal injury. Their research was invaluable to the advancement and understanding of the nervous system. The building is now the Grange Roster Hotel. So Thomas passes away shortly after this. He develops blood poisoning. And now there are letters as well, I'm pretty certain, of him writing home during this time. I haven't seen them, and I'm hoping that they'll turn up at some stage just to find out his kind of thoughts. I think to kind of almost complete the story a little bit. As a consolation, he got a spray of white heather sent to him by the Queen. Little piece here. Sure they all got one. It's amazing here when it says that this research was invaluable to the advancement and understanding of the nervous system. They had so many people kind of work on. And it's just very, very unfortunate. There's nothing in that hotel, nothing, not even one plaque to say what it formerly was. It's a lovely hotel where you can have a lovely time, but yet there's nothing, not even a plaque. As I said, he died on September 30th, 1917, aged 42 years old. So this is an account of his funeral. It says I won't read it all, it just says his coffin was wrapped in a Union Jack, surmounted by a splendid wreath of lilies. The tiling of the bell from the picturesque little parish church at Lorrha at 3 p.m. donated that all was mortal of a gallant young Irish officer. The interment took place. Although there were no flowers by special request, some friends bought or sent wreaths in addition to the ones sent by the Irish Guards. The chief mourners were. There's a huge list of the kind of chief mourners. His father dies a few years later, and there's a folklore to Stoney, the landlord, when he dies. Now it's kind of mixed up, but to say that he was late and the boat broke down and the train broke down and the car broke down and the horses wouldn't bring him. But actually, when I found this kind of note in the newspapers, it did say that a motor car broke down and the people were waiting there all day for him to arrive, and he was late for his own funeral, and he couldn't be buried until the following day. And that's where the kind of folklore came across, and I just thought it was fair to join the dots there. But it's funny, when his wife died, Ellen, she was carried from Portland House to Lorrha, which I would imagine be about 3 miles in around that point. She was carried by the tenants on their shoulders. So that speaks volumes for what the tenants thought of her. So this is the headstone where Thomas is buried. And it says Charles and Ellen are there as well. That's their one. And there's the view at the back of the headstone. They're looking at the old abbey or the old monastery site of St. Ruan of Lorrha. And there's the remains of a couple of high crosses even there. So it's a very, very scenic, beautiful area. And as I said, that's why when we do our tours, we pass his grave. So the aim of this research, basically there's more stuff. Upstairs we have some of his college work, some of his illustrations, a little book he to do for college, because it says TBS, Master of Arts. There's other stuff out there. I know this painting is out there. I'm not sure what it's part of. Is it part of some other book that I don't know about? I'm not sure. It definitely looks like it's telling a story. So there's more out there. There's a huge amount of stuff. And I suppose my job is just trying to piece together. But this is what I've kind of done so far. This was the collection that went out originally, Butler Stoney stuff that we managed to acquire. There's loads more of it. As I said, it's split all over the place. So I'm just going to finish. There's a letter in Yale University to Rudyard Kipling. He's replying to Butler Stoney. So he says, I have to acknowledge your letter of the April 10th with enclosure from Mansour Surratt. Now, he was the guy earlier on, remember the illustrator, he was illustrating the Indian Army guys, or in the British Army, the Indian guys. I am afraid that I shall not be able to do what he wants. So we don't know what he wants, because I am very much occupied with some work I have undertaken, and which I must finish. I am very grateful for your son for sending his letter, which I return herewith. I trust your son's wound is going on well. So he's talking here about Thomas, I'm pretty sure. If this is the case, this is one of the times when it is possible to congratulate a father of having a son in hospital. With regret that I am unable to help in this matter, yours sincerely, Rudyard Kipling. So these are the circles that these guys are in. He sends that from his home, Batemans in Sussex. Now the reason I brought Kipling into it, well, obviously we have the reference to the letter, but Kipling was on this kind of propaganda machine. He really believed that people needed to go out and fight for their country no matter what, including his own son, who had very, very bad eyesight. His son called John, his only son, and Kipling tries to get him into the Air Force, he tries to get him into the Navy, he tries to get him in everywhere and he can't, but eventually he gets him into the Irish Guards, which is the same regiment as Thomas Butler Stoney, both in the Irish Guards. So he gets him in there. There he is as a child, and there's the film about him, My Boy Jack, because he lasted 1 month at 18 years of age in the war. His body was not recovered until 1992. And that is the end of our lecture for this evening. Thank you very much.